Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Perdue, and I am a nerd, as most of you know. And today I have that feverish, chill, achy thing going on. I was not going to take Advil until I finally gave in at 12:25 and took 4 of them. But as any of you men will know, and as any of you women who are married to a man will know, we can be real babies when we're sick. So if you just, pamper me and give me all that attention, then I'll be fine. Today we are talking about 2 things in our, what is it, March 2010 Watercooler, which is what we affectionately call our virtual user group meeting. Today we are talking about the difference between writing up and writing down and writing off. And that's something that happens in Tabs, and I just realized both of our topics have to do with Tabs today. No, that's wrong. The other's PracticeMaster. It's a good thing I left PracticeMaster open. See, I'm a little delirious from the drugs. Mary Jo's going to talk about that. I then will talk about calendar plans, which are a really neat way to keep things moving in the right direction without having to put a whole bunch of dates in the calendar one by one. And we'll get more into that. But first, we're going to start with Mary Jo, but before we do, I am going to do the housekeeping section where we talk about getting rid of that obnoxious blue box that's taking over part of the right-hand side of your screen. It may or may not be covering up what you're seeing of my screen. If it is not, don't worry about it, but if it is, beware that, or be informed that there's a little box that pops off to the left, and the top icon in that little box of icons that pops off to the left is arrows that point to the right, and if you click those arrows, this big box will slide out of the way. Once that big box has slid out of the way, these arrows will turn into arrows that point to the left, and clicking that button again will cause the big box to slide back into place. You may or may not want to do that depending on whether A, you have a question, and B, whether you're shy or not. If you're shy, you will want to type any questions that you have directly into this box down here. Whoever is not talking will be monitoring that box, looking for questions, and will interrupt the person who is talking and get them to answer the question. If you are not feeling shy, you may instead want to press this button here that looks like a hand with an arrow in front of it, and that means, wait for it, you're raising your hand. And once we recognize or realize that you've got your hand raised, we will unmute you, let you ask your question, we'll answer it, we'll mute you back up after we're sure everything's been answered, and we'll go on. So, without any further ado, I will open up Tabs for Mary Jo and let her tell you all about the difference between writing up and down and writing off. Mary Jo?
We do have a question for you first of all, and somebody wants to know if you want some orange juice in a bucket. So throw that out there for
That's
you.
not the kind of pampering that I need. Mary Jo does it real well. She has this this sort of caring, comforting sort of sound that she makes, and it just makes me feel real good. So even though I can't hear you, if you would all just make that sound, then I will psychologically feel better.
All right. Well, I'm going to get started talking to you today about write-offs, writing up, and writing down, what the difference is, when to use them, how do I get to see them later on. So there's a lot of different things that we can do here. The first thing I'm going to talk about is writing up and writing down. The reason that you would want to write up and write down can be various, whether or not you need to adjust a bill or do something. But writing up and writing down is always done when the time is still in WIP. So, if it's still in WIP and you need to make some adjustments, that's when you use write up and write down. And when you go in and you choose what you want to write up and write down, it will go ahead through and adjust all the time accordingly throughout each time entry by incremental amounts to equal that total that you wanted to write up or write down. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to show you a client. We've got Marcus Phillips up here. He has a fee WIP of $2,695. And if I want to write that down to $2,000 or write it up to $3,000, all I need to do is choose write up and write down, and you would make your backup. And I can choose whether I want to go ahead and write up my fees, my expenses only, my advances only, or both expenses and advances. So if you have to come in and you have to adjust fees and expenses and advances, you need to do two separate write-ups and write-downs. You can write up your fee section first, and then you can come in and you can do expenses only or both expenses and advances or whatever there. You can come in and do this by transaction. You can go ahead and choose a beginning transaction code, and you can choose all of my office conferences need to be written up a certain amount or written down a certain amount. You can do it by timekeeper. Only Joe's time is going to be written up or written down by a certain amount, but everybody else is going to stay the same. You can do it by billing category. You can come in and say that all of the real estate, section, if you've got several categories. I don't think you can even do that on, two different categories on a client, but you could do it by,
you can have fees that...
Yeah, fees that have different categories. So you could go ahead and, it's probably unlikely to use that, but that's also an option. And you can do it through sections. I mean, if you want to do a beginning transaction code through an ending transaction code, beginning timekeeper through an ending timekeeper, and so on, you can do that. You can also give it a beginning cutoff date. So if you want to go in and, write up that time, down from a certain date forward or previous, you can go ahead and put an ending and beginning cutoff date in there. You can even include entries that you've put on hold. So if you don't want to do that, you can just uncheck that box. Once you've come in and you've decided that you want to do your fees only, and you can come in and you can adjust the amount type. You can tell it that you want it to be a percentage or an amount, or you can do your hours adjustment type. And again, you can do it by hours or amount. So if I want to calculate my client total and change these amounts, I just click on that Calculate Client Total button. I come in and I say that I want to write it up to $3,000 even. And I can go ahead and say OK, and it's going to go ahead and it will adjust all of my time entries because I haven't specified anything in particular up to $3,000. If I wanted to do it by just a percentage, you can come in and you can write up by 15%, and it will go ahead and take it up. So this is very useful. Before you build, you can go in here and you can adjust and write up and write down your total account information here. So you can also do your expenses. I come in here and do that. Again, calculate the client total. I don't have any expenses out here for this client. All of my time is under fees. But if I did, it would be the same process. You can come in and then redo this for your expenses, advances, or both expenses and advances, whichever you prefer. Okay? So that is write up and write down. Are there any questions about when to use it or what you need to do?
Well, assuming that Mr. Purdue, my brother, is the one who asked about, yes, juice in the bucket. No, there are no questions.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close this window. And I'm going to talk about write-off. To write off the client is what you would do after you've already billed it. So you can only write off an AR balance. And this client does have an AR balance, so I'm going to go ahead and choose write off. And you'd make your backup. And then when we get into the write-off screen, you've got several different options here as well. You can write off the entire balance. Whatever's left, I can write off the total amount. Or I can choose a statement to write off. And I can say I want to write off all statements or a specific statement. So if I need to go back so many statements and go ahead and choose an amount that I want to write off, I can choose that statement, and then I can come in and I can tell it I want to write off $200 or, this whole statement or whatever portion of it I want to write off. Something else that you can do is you can also come in and you can write off by timekeeper. And you can be specific, so if you want to write off just a certain timekeeper's time, I could come in and just choose that timekeeper and write off their time or a certain portion of that time. So write off, again, has the same types of ways that you can, a lot of different parameters that you can use to come in and change the amount that you want to bill the client or that you have billed the client. And that is how you can get the time off of the bill. So if you've already billed it and you don't know how to, reduce it or to get it off and you can't go back and unbill it or unupdate the statement, this is where you just come in. You can write off any amount that you want in several different ways. Any questions on write-off?
Let me check.
I'm going to give you two, while Paul's checking there, I'm going to give you a couple of other little tips here. Now, I'm in Client Manager right now to look at this information. And these icons that are in here are all customizable. So if you come into Client Manager and you don't show write up or write down or write off, you can customize those and put these buttons right on here so you can come in easily and adjust those figures. And to do that, you just want to go ahead and click on the Customize button down here at the bottom of the screen. I need the mouse, Paul.
Sorry.
There you go. So we go in here and we click on the Customize. And I can click on any icon, and it will take me to a list. And I can then choose write up, write down, or write off, or whatever I want to add to this list of things that I want to do for this individual client. So this one we've got it set as write up, write down. It's going to go ahead and put it there. Once I've got all my icons that I want there, I just click the Run button again. And when I click on those buttons, then it would go ahead and take me right into that program to go ahead and do those things that I want to do. One other thing I want to touch base on, a lot of times I get clients that want to know how can I show what the just certain parameters on for each client. I want to know their work in process. I want to know their accounts receivable and their total write-offs all on one report. And a lot of times what we will tell our clients to do is to use the transaction file list. The only problem when you want to see write-offs, and as many of you have probably done, when you go into the transaction file list, it will show you all the fee, work in process. It'll show you all the payments that have come in. It'll show you, all of your AR balance, all of that. But when it comes to the write-off on a line item, it will show it as write-off, and the amount is always 0. So if you need to get an accurate figure, all of those things in one report, I found when I was in, reports, under the client reports, we've got the new top client report. And a lot of times you use this report to go ahead and get your top 20 clients for certain areas. It might be your top 20 that you want to see for work in process, or your top 20 AR, or there's all kinds of different things you can do here. But what I found is if you come into this top client report and you go ahead and you can choose, just one client. I want to see just Michael Larson here. Or actually, let's go back into our Marcus Phillips since we know he's got some things there. I can do this. I can search by certain timekeepers, or I can limit this report just like any other report. And then on my Options tab, instead of having my top 20 matters or clients, I can just choose this top one because I'm only looking at this one particular client. I don't need to include any totals for other clients. I can rank it by whatever I want. All that means is that column will be highlighted on my report. So if I want to see, write-offs, and that's the main thing I want to see, I would just rank it by that, and that column on my report will be highlighted. I can do a parameter for my range of for the date, and I can also do working timekeeper or anything like that. But the key here is on my format column, I can include columns for my work in process fees or my total WIP for this client. I can then come down and I can do a total build time, so I know how much I've billed. I can come in and do a total of my write-offs. I can do the total for any fees that have been paid, unallocated. All of these, I can do a column for that. And then when I do my report, it's going to show me amounts for each one of those different fields. And you can get it all in one report, and it just seems that you even get the total paid and even the current amount due. And so if you just need to get a quick report with all of these things for one particular client, oops, there we go. I can come in. I don't know what it's going to show. This is sample data. But you can see I'll have his total WIP in one column, the total amount we've ever billed, all the write-offs, the total amount he's paid, and then the total amount that's due for this client. And it's just all totals, or if you needed to see individually by fees, by expenses, you saw the column things there that you can choose. Now, you are limited to the, 4, 5, 6, 7 columns here. But most of the information that you need to get on one report, you can actually gather it here and do that in those 7 columns. So it's very powerful. It's not just for your top client matters, and in certain areas you can actually include columns and get information all in one place. Any other questions?
Deborah wants to know if you do a write-off and then figure out later that you didn't mean to do it,
yep.
Is there a way to reverse it?
Yes, there is. And how you can do that, let me cancel out of here. mouse back. Under maintenance, oops,
Sorry, that was me.
you threw my mouse back.
I'm sick.
Under maintenance and under client related, there is a reverse write-off button. And if you click that, it's going to go ahead and again, you'll make your backup. You can choose the client and then you can do the drop down and choose the reference of the write-off that you want to reverse and say okay, and it'll go ahead and reverse it, put everything back how it was. Other questions?
No other questions.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to you, Paul. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, gosh, you gave them 2 extra things for free, and
I did.
I don't know, and then you didn't leave me enough time to do that. Okay, we're going to go into PracticeMaster, and we're going to talk about something called calendar plans, and they're a very powerful way to structure dates off of a certain date. And the example that I always used to like to use is date of death, triggering a whole bunch of other things that get done. And in some states, it's the date of death that triggers what happens. In others, it's the date of filing. But regardless, that one particular date, and I'm not an attorney, I'm making these things up, may trigger a bunch of other things that have to be done in relation to that date. For instance, within 2 weeks, you may need to file another form with the probate court. Within a month, you may need to file with the IRS. Within 6 months, you may need to file the first 706. Within a year, you need to do this. And there's all sorts of other dates in between. Calendar plans are a way to set up templates that identify that main date, that trigger date is what I call it, and all the other dates that fall off of that. And it's very sophisticated. So we're going to go into calendar and calendar plan templates, and we're going to look at one here that's kind of simple, which is statute of limitation reminders. And this particular calendar plan template is triggered off the actual statute date, which of course you would know. If somebody's injured in an accident, there's a certain time period within which you can file. So this is very simple. On 0 days, in other words, the actual date, you have a capitalized task that appears that says statute of limitation expires today. 1 day before, you have one that says it expires tomorrow. A week before, or 7 days before, you have it expires in a week, a month, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. So this is going to generate these 8 or 9 dates based on us running it and putting in the statute of limitation date. And the way you run them is to simply go over to, well, no, we were already there. We highlight the particular plan that we want to generate. We click Process Template. We give it a name like Larson Statute of Limitations. We pick the client, and I'm going to choose Michael Larson. We pick the statute date. Let's say it's 2 years from what the system thinks is today's date, because this is demo date. It lives in November 17th of 2009. So we'll pick November 17th of 2011. And who are we going to generate these dates for? We'll do them for me. And you can also include a related party that these items are all tagged to, usually not something that you're doing, but you can also generate these for a related party. And say OK. It goes out and it generates Larson's SOL dates. And now if we go and look in the calendar, we would be able to see that all these dates now exist for Michael Larson's workers' comp case based on the trigger date that we put in of November 17th of 2011. So we're going to have one the day before, a week before, a month before, 3 months before, and they're basically just there. Now, when we generate these, I'm going to go back, and what it's doing now is it's saying, hey, these are the dates I've generated. Do you want to accept it, or do you want to reject it, or do you want to print it and then accept it? I'm going to reject it because I've already got one out there from Mr. Larson for this. Now, when you define these calendar plan templates, you can put either events or tasks or a combination of the two in there. For each item, you can edit the fields. So maybe one of these items is request medical records, and maybe that's always done by Phyllis. So we go here, and we could actually put Phyllis's ID in as the person who's performing that task. Or maybe we have a certain note that we want to put in there, or maybe we want to also put in reminders when we do this, or anything. Maybe it's only for a certain office. So we can edit the fields in the records that we're creating so that they'll create automatically the right records with the right fields filled in the right way. We can also say, on this particular item, stop, so that we can edit the fields before proceeding. In other words, when I generate the plan, stop on this one so we can say, yeah, Betty Lou's going to check on those medicals, or maybe Susan's going to check on those medicals because it's a case that falls within her jurisdiction as opposed to Betty Lou's. So we can either put fields directly into the records, or we can have it stop and ask us. We specify the intervals. We specify whether or not we're going to adjust for things like weekends and holidays. And we have a lot of control there. And I'm going to pull up one that's a little bit more complex, the trial setting. Yeah, we're not going to save. This is one that has some dates that are dependent on the trial setting date, and then some other that are dependent on one of the subdates. And a date can be either a, what's the word here, Mary Jo? Can be either a dependent or a sibling item, and a sibling item is sometimes called a secondary item. A dependent item is going to be dependent on this main date, which in this instance is the trial date. A sibling item is going to be dependent on a secondary date. So for instance, let's say in my example that I gave a minute ago, somebody dies, we file with the probate court, and that filing date becomes a trigger date for a whole bunch of other dates. Let's say within a month you have to file with the IRS to something that says this person died. And then 3 months after that, within 3 months after the date that you do that thing, that you file with the IRS, you have to actually file a 706 or a 1041 or whatever the different tax returns are. Again, I'm making all this up. Well, if you were to perform that first step of filing with the IRS 2 weeks early, then the 3 months needs to be adjusted because it's 3 months after the date you did it, not 3 months after the date you were supposed to do it. So that's the difference between an item that's dependent on the actual original date and an item that may be dependent on one of the other dates. So in this example, the original date is the date that the person's death was recorded first with the probate court. Within a month, we need to file with the IRS an initial form, but 3 months after that initial form is filed, we need to file the first return, and if it's done, if the first step of filing the initial form is done a week early, then that needs to push back the deadline for the IRS date a week so that we fall within that particular deadline. Very sophisticated things that you can do here in creating checklists, in creating reminders for very important dates like statute of limitation dates, creating jurisdictional trial reminders. For instance, different courts in different jurisdictions in different counties are going to have different rules about when you have to have your expert witness list in, when you have to have your trial exhibits listed, when you have to pick up your trial exhibits after the trial. So a lot of different things you can do here, and you can create different templates for different situations within the same realm. So, for instance, appearing in federal court, well, let's do this differently. Appearing in a county's local court may be different. There may be different rules about expert witness lists and all these things if you're in Cuyahoga County as opposed to being in Hamilton County as opposed to being in Lucas County. So you can set up different calendar plans for the different jurisdictions and generate the one on a case-by-case basis that is specific to and appropriate to that particular case, based on where the court is, based on where the person died, based on whatever the circumstance is surrounding the basis for these dates. Calendar plans can also go both ways. They can have dates that are before or after the event, or both. So for instance, if you have a trial sort of calendar plan, you're going to have deadlines before the trial. You have to submit interrogatories by a certain date, and the answers have to be submitted by a certain date. The exhibit lists, the witness lists have to be submitted by a certain date. After the trial, you have to pick up exhibits from the courthouse within 3 days. You have to do other things within 7 days. You might have to file another sort of motion if you've lost within a month. You have that much time to do that. So there are both directions involved with this trigger date, and you can set up calendar plans that go one way, go the other way, or go both ways. There is also something called the calendar plans, the court rules from CompuLaw. And basically, CompuLaw is a company out in California. In California, you have a lot of different jurisdictions. You have a lot of lawyers. You have a lot of people. And you have a lot of confusion about different rules between different jurisdictions. So CompuLaw is a company that started in California and has branched out to cover pretty much the entire United States. And they have huge selections of rule sets that you can buy from them for different counties, for different jurisdictions within a state court, for the federal court, for the Patent and Trademark Office, a whole bunch of different rule sets that you can buy. And it's basically what you're doing is you're paying somebody to have a staff of attorneys that have written these rule sets for you. I personally have never sold one of the CompuLaw rule sets because most people want to manage this on their own. They want to have somebody within their firm that has control over how these rule sets, how these calendar plans have been built, how they're being generated, and when something changes, they want to be able to change it and basically turn on a dime. Something changed in the court yesterday, we can change this calendar plan, and bingo, everything's changed across the board in our system. We don't have to wait for CompuLaw to release an update. So there is that out there. If you're practicing in a very particular, very specific jurisdictional boundary and want the assurance of having somebody else doing that for you, there's a company that does do that. Any questions, Mary Jo?
No questions, Paul.
Okay. Well, we have ended within time, and I didn't pass out from either drugs or lack thereof. So I guess we're doing all right. And that concludes our March 2010 virtual user group meeting that we affectionately call the Watercooler. We have not picked topics for next month yet, so we will, as usual, be sending you an email the Thursday before the last Tuesday of the month announcing the topics, and we hope to see everybody there. Everybody have a good afternoon, and we'll see you in a month. Thanks much.